All right, so this is The Price Goes Up, but we're starting with Kaitlyn, who has got supercomputing.
Supercomputing, yes. Nextgov.com, which honestly sounds like a bit of a oxymoron, has an article by Brandy Vincent talking about the aim of certain, or rather new supercomputing learning models, so machine learning, AI, to predict new COVID-19 variants and respond to treatments before the mutations even happen. And so this is something
totally bogus.
Well, they're investing 1.1 million into this effort.
1 million? It really sounds bogus.
Yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting if this. It'll be interesting to see if this actually works, because it sounds really hard, and there's so many mutations that a virus can go through, right? It's not easily predictable. It's very chaotic. But I imagine there are certain types of mutations that can all be sort of treated similarly, which is probably what they're going to be looking at. But they're investing 1.1 million in this and see how it goes. And this is sort of the first good news in COVID research we've heard since the mRNA, which, because one of the big things right now is COVID is becoming endemic, and we're going to be living with it. And the last thing we want is for all the mutations to crop up and catch us unaware. And so thinking ahead, having models that predict and respond to potential mutations as soon as possible is a really good thing.
Yeah. Although I think, someday this might be good. I think in the short term, just genetic testing of what you've got is out there. Like they showed that the COVID that went into the deer has now mutated in the deer and now jumped back to the humans. So, that's, they can detect that directly.
Yes.
Anyway, all right. And so Liz is going to throw Russia off the internet.
Yeah. So right now, Russia's the target of a variety of sanctions and embargoes from around the world, including cat shows. No Russian cats allowed in cat shows, but it doesn't stop there. The everything from chips to cats and in between. So the latest is that there's been a request made to ICANN to unplug Russia from the internet, and there's a article in Rolling Stone that was kind of interesting, talking about how Ukraine had petitioned ICANN to revoke domains in Russia and basically shut down a lot of their major DNS servers. I don't think they're going to say yes. That would be pretty bad for just everyday Russians, but then again, so is losing access to the banking system. So
who controls ICANN? Is it controlled by one country?
No, it's a consortium of people. There's I remember reading some really interesting stuff about this. There's 7 key holders or whatever. Dan Kaminsky used to be one of them.
I know that, the root of DNS, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't think there's any way they're actually going to do that, because they're essentially the reasoning behind the request is that all of the misinformation and propaganda that's being put out by Russia. But, the issue is, for me, is that, and for many, is that, you can't, yes, there's a lot of propaganda, but that's also how people are accessing what's really going on too. So, there's really two sides to that coin, and it's probably not the best way to shut down misinformation campaigns.
Yeah. Well, I don't suppose it's going to happen, but it would be interesting.
Yeah.
All right. And Alan has got Conti.
Yes, the Conti ransomware gang has been going through a bit of trouble lately. The story is a bit unclear, but it appears that a Ukrainian researcher and or member of Conti has leaked all of their chat logs, and apparently a year's worth of chat logs. They've been using Jabber for some time, and this leaker managed to get his hands on the pretty much everything for the past couple of years, and he's released it. And so it's been a field day for a number of threat intelligence and malware analysts because it's got everything. Really, they were very open in discussing internal matters in Jabber. And so anything that you could want to find out about the workings of Conti is in here. Now, some of the more interesting revelations in these chat logs include a thread by Christo Grozev, who's the head or one of the main participants in Bellingcat, a major OSINT research group, which he says shows that the Conti people were interested in finding out more about Alexander Navalny, one of the major dissidents, probably Putin's largest critic, most prominent critic and viable politician, opposition politician. And apparently the Conti group were interested in finding information about a Bellingcat member who is unnamed, and they were able to install some malware on her computer. And then apparently one of the Conti members implied that he was in communication with the FSB, which of course is Russia's intelligence service, the descendant of the KGB. And so that implies that Conti is working with the FSB in order to find out information that's needed by the FSB. Is not directly relevant to Conti's money-making operations. But that's not the only revelation. In fact, there's been so much information coming out of these leaks, all of it in Russian, of course, so it's not accessible, or it's much less accessible to people who are not Russian speakers. But all kinds of information, including how much they're getting paid, which is not very much, as it turns out. They have different pay tiers, but the people on the low end are not getting paid very much. And for that matter, people on the high end definitely aren't getting paid very much either. So ransomware doesn't pay if you're one of the grunts. It doesn't pay at all. Maybe the people up on top are getting a lot more money. And in fact, by some estimates, Conti's pulled in over $3 billion.
Wow.
But the people on the bottom are just getting paid like $1,000 a month, maybe $2,000 a month, and that's it.
Yep. All right. Well, I got a bunch of links about Ukraine. I was amazed to read the financial results. The Russian stocks have fallen by like 99% and more, and they've frozen the Russian stock exchange for 4 days, so you can't trade it, so you won't even find out how bad it is. So people are lining up in huge lines to get the money out of the bank and turn it into dollars, but no banks have dollars. When they find out there's only rubles, they just get out of the line and give up because rubles are worthless. So the financial sanctions seem to be extremely effective at destroying the Russian stock market. There was a meme going around of a clip of a newscast in Russia where they asked the stock analyst, and the guy just pulls out vodka and takes a drink and says, "It was nice when we had a stock market. It's gone now." And so Kasparov, the the Russian chess grandmaster, who is a real hawk against Putin, says that he'd been saying since 2014 that we're already in World War III and you have to knock off your illusions and we have to stop Putin now. Because Putin is like Hitler. He's going to keep taking over countries one after another. He's not going to stop at Ukraine, and the price will just go up to stop him. And it's a pretty persuasive argument. And he says, the thing that amazes me is what we're doing right now. We are directly fighting the Russians. We give the weapons to the Ukrainians and they fight the Russians. Everybody knows we're giving them the weapons. We're totally open about that. So in what sense are we not fighting the Russians already? Well, somehow we're maintaining enough veneer of not directly fighting the Russians that it doesn't start World War III, apparently. So what he says is, why don't you do what the Russians did in Ukraine last time? Why don't you just let Ukraine give your military Ukrainian passports so they can pretend to be Ukrainians like the little green men and fly in and bomb that convoy of stuff? That probably wouldn't be exactly the US fighting Russians either, would it? I'm out of my depth here. This is all just a tower of lies. And there's some point at which the lies go over the line. And I don't know where that line is, but I don't know if anybody does. And anyway, one big thing, I was surprised to see Manchin sitting with the Republicans at the State of the Union address. His point is he is very, very, very mad at Biden because Biden is still buying Russian oil. And a lot of people are saying you need to stop buying Russian oil. That would hurt them more. And so Jen Psaki explained it better than anybody with this article. She said, we have calculated the American oil companies have plenty of leases. They could drill and make more oil if they wanted to. We do not need to give them financial handouts to make them make more oil, which is what you're asking for. And if we cut off the Russian oil, then the price of gasoline would go up a lot, and that would hurt the Americans more and make it harder to tolerate the sanctions. So we have calculated that this is the correct move now to hurt Russia without hurting Americans too much. And, I don't know if that's true, but it's not completely stupid. Anyway, the last one I thought was most interesting to me is Zelensky just foiled his third assassination attempt. They've sent in elite hit squads from various types, and they have failed to get him 3 times, not because the Ukrainian defense is so good, but because they're betrayed from the inside. There's a bunch of people inside the Russian military that do not agree with what's happening, and they leak these plans to foil the hit squads and get the hit squads killed, which has happened 3 times, or at least defeated. So, the support for Putin is not unanimous like you might think it is, but on the other hand, Putin doesn't actually need any support. He's just a dictator. So anyway, that's where we stand, and I'm not quite sure what we should do next, but certainly the sanctions, which I thought were going to do nothing, are doing a lot more than I expected. So that's something, but we're also sacrificing Ukraine by not bothering to save it when we could. And I'm not sure if that's the right decision or not. Anyway, well, back to Kaitlyn. She's got a rat.
A rat in our midst. Yes. Ars Technica has an article written by Dan Gooden talking about a Google Play app downloaded 10,000 times. And it was malware. It was just a rat. So a remote access Trojan that used the accessibility features on Android in order to steal screenshots of things like banks and steal passwords and secrets and stuff like that. So the bot, the Trojan that goes under the name of T-Bot and Natsa came to light. It was being downloaded as a QR code reader. It was just like QR code app, read QR codes, now and stuff. And it got put on 10,000 machines, 10,000 Android devices before it was discovered that this thing was, of course, stealing data, stealing banking information, reporting back to a command and control server. So yeah, definitely there's a bunch of malware up on these stores. And so you really just have to be careful about what you download.
There always has been. And yet they say the number of phones that's actually infected is less than 1%. I've been saying that for years. I don't know if it's true, but it's probably true.
Probably true. I mean, the 10,000 is a lot, but it's also not a lot compared to the number of Android phone users there are.
Yeah. All right. And Liz has got a Russian activist.
Yeah, so Putin not doing the best job of winning hearts and minds, not even in Russia, because, if it walks like an autocratic dictator and it talks like an autocratic dictator, I'll let you draw your own conclusions.
I don't think anybody in Russia has any illusions about what Putin is.
Yeah, it seems, and who knows, because we're just getting news from afar. I'm not there, but it sure seems like a lot of Russians, maybe even most Russians, really aren't cool with this whole invading Ukraine plan and bombing everyone. And so there have been widespread protests. And boy, the police have really been cracking down on those in Russia and show no signs of letting up. And the latest story that came out was this woman who, as a baby, she had survived the Nazi siege on Leningrad. And she showed up with her, "Hey, lay down your arms, let's not fight" posters in St. Petersburg at one of these anti-war protests, and 8 cops came up and carted this sweet little old babushka off to the gulag. And for some reason, this is causing major outrage.
Well, I would hope so. Yeah. You know, I'm reading a lot of the old Soviet jokes coming back. And the one I liked was the guy who goes to the newsstand in Moscow, buys a newspaper, but he looks at the front page and just throws it away. The next day he does it again. The next day he does it again. And the newsstand guy says, "What are you doing that for?" He said, "I'm looking for an obituary." He said, "But the obituary is not on the front page." And he says, "Well, the one I'm looking for will be on the front page."
Yes, exactly.
Anyway.
And you know, it's interesting too, especially considering how many, you know, the Zelensky, as you mentioned, had survived 3 assassination attempts in just the last week, at least 3, probably more.
Yep.
Makes you wonder how many times people have tried to get Putin. You'll never hear about it if he can help it, but it does make you wonder.
Well, this is what Ann Applebaum said. She said he's sitting at the end of that 30-yard table. Maybe that's not COVID. Maybe that's to avoid assassination.
Or both, who knows?
Yeah. Well, they tell me his COVID fear is incredibly paranoid. You can't even meet with him at all unless you do 2 weeks of isolation before meeting with him. So
yeah, and you have to take Russian COVID tests, which some folks have been a little wondering, like, okay, well, they've got my DNA now.
well, I wonder if the Russian COVID tests are any better than the Russian vaccine, because I think the Russian vaccine is junk. All right. Anyway, all right. So then we're back to Alan with Credit Suisse.
Yes, more bad news for Credit Suisse. This time they have put out a request to various investors to destroy documents relating to any loans that Credit Suisse made to Russian oligarchs for their planes, boats, multi-million-dollar homes, et cetera, et cetera. Apparently, in the world of high finance, there is just an open spigot to loan money to billionaires. I don't know why a bank would even bother loaning money to a billionaire, because the billionaire, by definition, has billions of dollars and probably doesn't need a loan to buy a $60 million house.
What about Donald Trump?
I mean, Donald Trump isn't actually a billionaire. He doesn't actually own anything.
Now
really.
You have to define it. He has some control over $1 billion in assets, but he's also hugely in debt. And that, I think, is the situation with most of them.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, because these Russian oligarchs, some of them really do control major corporations, you know, major oil companies, major mineral extraction companies, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, but then they call it having a liquidity crisis when you don't actually have enough money to pay for a boat, because all your money is tied up in these things. You don't really have the money.
I guess I just don't understand this world well enough, and that's why I'm not a billionaire myself.
That must be it. Yeah.
So, and clearly I'm hopeless. It's never going to happen for me. But at any rate, Credit Suisse apparently doesn't want this knowledge to become too widely disseminated. I mean, obviously they shared it with some of these investment firms that were buying into these loans, but now they're concerned about further leaks, just like the one I talked about last time on the previous pod.
Yeah.
So this is clearly an issue for Credit Suisse, and one might even argue part of a larger pattern of behavior.
Well, you know, I know in America, if this happened to Arthur Andersen, if you know a lawsuit is coming and you destroy the evidence, that does not save you in court, not at all.
Well, I don't know how Swiss law works, but in this case, I don't know if the investors are in any way culpable or responsible, because ultimately this is Credit Suisse's information.
Yeah, and what they did might have been legal at the time, but I think they're worried about sanctions now.
Yeah.
And the collateral damage of sanctions on other people.
Yes, as they should be.
Well, yeah. All right. And so then, and here's one in the same spirit. OpenSea, the NFT market, has now suddenly realized they are an American company and therefore they cannot violate American sanctions, for example, against Iran and North Korea. And they've been just servicing the whole world. So this week they began blocking Iran and North Korea and a bunch of other countries in order to comply with American law. And this is, I think, sort of the maturing of this industry. I was just talking to a student about it last night that was buying NFTs and gave a presentation about them. Because, you know, there's been a period of Wild West when these cryptocurrency marketplaces are just doing any crazy thing. And now the financial system is beginning to notice and regulate them. And they're beginning to realize that you haven't really escaped what country you're in, and you haven't really escaped the financial laws. You really have to obey the law just like everybody else. So the bunch of people are saying, but we're supposed to be decentralized and free. And they say, yeah, but we have to block Iran. And obviously they're going to have to block Russia pretty soon too, if they haven't already, which is going to be a big problem. In fact, what's been going on is they say a bunch of NFT projects come from Russia. A lot of the mathematics behind cryptocurrency come from Russia and Ukraine. And all the Russian NFT projects have been doing rug pulls to get the money out quick, just stealing all the money now, because they know that they're going to get cut out of the system and have no chance to get any money very soon. So anyway, that's the libertarian cryptocurrency people feel very, very abused that the global sanctions against certain countries are actually getting in their way instead of them being able to just ignore that like they had hoped. And we go back to a cure for space junk, which would be awesome.
And not only that, Steve Wozniak is involved. So CNN Business has an article on Steve Wozniak's newest venture. This is an article by Jackie Watis from CNN Business. So Steve Wozniak is starting a new business, and this time it's going after space junk, which of course has been a topic we've talked about before on the podcast. This is a big issue. We're putting so much stuff into space that we're creating an issue with basically space pollution, especially around low Earth orbit. And of course, if things get really bad and two satellites hit each other, you now have 10,000 satellites, which can hit other satellites, which creates, exponentially more satellites to hit other satellites. And if we do it enough times, if that happens in an unlucky manner, well, space travel gets halted for 5 to 10 years, at least. So yeah, we really need to get on this space junk thing. And Steve Wozniak is starting a company called Privateer to track and prevent objects from colliding with each other in low Earth orbit, which is great. Not a whole lot of information about what Privateer is going to be doing other than they're developing some new software and GPS services.
How is that going to bring them down? I mean, how do you bring them down? I haven't heard any practical plan.
To what? To bring down satellites?
Yeah.
Well, most satellites will just, low Earth orbit satellites will deorbit by themselves over time.
Well, sure. So what is he going to do if he's not going to?
He's going to track them. He's going to track them. And then if there's a potential collision, one of the working satellites can hopefully maneuver out of the way, because all you need is a small nudge. The problem, of course, is that you're working on this sort of curved surface, around Earth. And you're looking many rotations ahead about where a object might be. And you also have to take into account things like you don't know maybe the exact position of the object. A lot of objects are very small, as well as you have things like atmospheric fluctuation. So if there's a giant solar storm and it heats up the upper atmosphere, the atmosphere expands, and then it increases drag on some of these objects. And that's why, for example, TLE data is updated, telemetry data is updated every 2 weeks, because you can't just say, oh, it's now in orbit, it's going to do the same thing forever and ever, kind of like the moon. No, it's very chaotic up there. And so newer technologies, newer ventures are needed.
So could we artificially cause the atmosphere to puff up and put some drag on them with like a bomb or something?
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I don't think that is something we can, within our current technological grasp, at least not without causing nuclear winter.
Well, yeah, we'll have to break an omelet. You have to break some eggs to make an omelet. But yeah. Well, I wonder. All right. Anyway. Yeah, I haven't heard anybody propose any actual technical way to bring them down that would work. Yeah.
I wonder if you'll be able to buy space junk offsets.
Yeah, so they're not talking about bringing them down. That's the thing that kind of makes this interesting. There's been a few proposals about companies that want to send up grabber arms, and that seems ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
And of course, if something goes wrong, then of course, then you have 10,000 satellites.
Yeah, you can't just hook them one by one. You need to put some friction up there to drag them down.
I mean, ideally, yeah, you want to be able to grab, like, you want to send up one rocket, they'll take down like 20 satellites, not just one.
Oh, I would think you want to send up like a magnetic field that, you got to get like a big net up there to sweep up a large quantity of them.
Yeah, something like that would be interesting, but that's not what they're doing. They're not talking about
Yeah.
taking them down. They're talking about just tracking them and making sure collisions don't happen in the first place.
NASA's already doing that to some extent, right? But I guess he's
Yeah.
just going to do it better. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, there have been collisions in the past, and so there are small little pieces of debris in orbit just
Yeah.
waiting to hit like a bullet. Because keep in mind, if you have a small piece of metal in orbit, that's going much faster than a bullet. And
Yeah.
a small piece of metal going faster than a bullet is just a bullet.
Yep. Yep. All right. And Liz has got a new DDoS amplification.
Yeah, this is kind of neat, actually. Some researchers at Akamai found out that people have been leveraging essentially these what they refer to in the write-up as middle boxes. They act as content buffers for probably, I mean, they didn't explicitly say it in the article, but I'm gonna go ahead and say places like China, where they've got people behind a firewall, essentially.
So they're proxy servers, right?
Yes, and people are using, and they were badly misconfigured, so people have been using those to launch DDoS attacks, which is pretty neat.
Yep. They take UDP traffic and then have a big response.
Mm-hmm.
The classic flaw.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about these is you usually can't do it too long before people patch them because you flood the whole network with traffic and freeze it. So they get motivated.
Yeah, I mean, but it seems like this has been going on for a while, actually, because they had found these boxes some time ago. This fleet they discovered some time ago, August of last year, it says in the article. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was going on a lot longer, especially if all of these servers are grossly misconfigured. People probably aren't paying a whole lot of attention to maintaining them, as long as you can't get to, like, Twitter and Facebook.
Well, yeah, but I mean, with an amplification of 56,000, that's insane. That can't last for long. Even the
yeah.
anyway, but good. It's definitely something that has to get fixed. All right, and Alan's got the Russian the EV chargers.
Yes, as another one of these curious side incidents in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a number of electric vehicle charging stations in Russia have been displaying messages such as, well, I can't give a proper translation, but it is a disparaging insult to Vladimir Putin. And
I found a nice webpage full of like Ukrainian swear words, because they said this will help you understand this kind of news story, because the Ukrainians swear a lot.
Apparently so, although this is for a Russian audience, so presumably this was a insult popular in Russia too.
Mm-hmm.
But also slogans such as "Glory to Ukraine" and "Glory to the Heroes," all of which were displayed on the EV chargers themselves, on the display screens. And so users who tried to use these would instead get a message about Putin or about Ukraine. And apparently there's a bit of a supply chain issue here, because the chargers are produced by a Russian company, but or I should say that the chargers are marketed by a Russian company, but they're actually produced by a Ukrainian company, which has a back door into all of these machines. And so they were able to remotely change the messages displayed on all of these machines.
Yep.
There aren't very many of these machines, because there are only something like 10,000 electric vehicles in all of Russia anyway. So this is not really going to have any impact on a larger Ukrainian disinformation campaign or propaganda campaign. Nevertheless, it's one of these interesting side notes.
I would bet that
Oh.
message gets to the rich Russians.
Mhm.
At least those, yes.
It's an epic troll. Though I think a lot of the rich Russians are pretty upset with him too. I had seen that a businessman put out a bounty, a Russian, one of the Russian oligarchs put out a bounty on Putin. So I don't think they're very happy with him either, because this is really I imagine this is really cutting into the profits and causing a lot of problems for them in their personal lives.
Well, you know what I heard is that they're already punishing their family and their wives and children. But if you really want to hurt them, you deport their mistresses back home, and they have to explain that to their wife, which would be the next move, because they typically have mistresses in these foreign ports and everything. But you know, they're living a decadent life, and you can easily rock the boat. But putting out a contract on Putin, that is really extreme. You normally don't mess with Putin like that, because Putin kills people right and left.
He does, but I mean, look at what he did to the guy who was the richest man in Russia. I forget what his name was, but he had the petro fuels company, and essentially he made Putin mad because he tried to say, hey, you know, you should probably go with the European economic model over our standard like corruption palms greasing model. And Putin took away his corporation, broke it up, gave it to his cronies, and then threw him in a gulag for 10 years in Siberia, basically. So
I would think putting out a contract on Putin would be an even larger offense.
maybe, but I think you can only push people like that so far, and they will, especially the ultra wealthy, they're not going to fall in line at some point. When he starts cramping their style like that, I think he's playing a dangerous game.
Well, you know, this is what I think Sean Hannity said. He said or it was Lindsey Graham said, what do the Russians should just kill Putin? That would be swell. And
well, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of.
Yeah, it might be swell, but it's probably not something you should be saying explicitly from like a high office, like someone that thinks they're going to be president.
Yeah. And I definitely, if I were one of those people, I don't think I would want to put it out there that I was publicly, that I was a big proponent for assassinating that guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's not how you do it. Anyway, and I got Samsung has been caught throttling the apps. Apparently, what phones do, several of them have been doing this. They want to have higher benchmarks on the standard benchmark tests. So they make that run at full speed, but that would drain the battery too fast. So they throttle everything else to preserve the battery. So this means when you compare the phone in ratings, it will rate high, but when you actually buy the phone, it won't work very well. And this is kind of like when VW rigged the emissions tests for their cars. They've been caught again by doing this. And it kind of reminds me of when Comcast was throttling all the video services except theirs. Many people have an opportunity to rig the game, and Samsung has got caught doing it. So anyway, so if you look at the ratings of phones, you might want to take them with a grain of salt. Anyway, that's it for this one. It being Friday, we'll be back on Tuesday.